Good morning, everybody. This is Anita, Teresa with the Embodied Femme, and Sheila Kumara Hay. And we're here to talk this morning about a really special topic, a new burgeoning topic in a lot of circles of women leaders, and that is about pleasure and ushering in the paradigm of pleasure and releasing the old paradigm of suffering and hardship, and how that translates into our lives on many levels, especially as a woman. Our bodies are designed for pleasure, and yet we're still, in a society that doesn't embrace that fully in many ways. So I'm just really thrilled to be here with Sheila, who's inspired me and really touched me, and um, I love what she's doing with her work with women. She's the founder of Ecstatic Birth and provides education and resources for women, mostly online resources, but also in person, and in her individual work with women, to have ecstatic birth experiences. I'm not a mother, but I would like to be one day, and I definitely plan to listen to all of your your recordings and learn from you. And Sheila and I met at the Just Love event, which is part of 1 Billion Rising, with Eve Ensler's work around having 1 billion people dance to end violence against women. And we met there in February. Was it? No, it was
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day. Gosh, it's been so long.
Yeah.
um, and we just were drawn to each other and started to share about what our respective work is, and my work with women around really cultivating a healthy relationship to their own bodies, their femininity, and cultivating all these gifts, this relationship to one's own body throughout a woman's whole lifetime. So really, what we just have talked about is this work of loving your body, listening deeply to your body, honoring and cherishing your feminine essence, and all the things that go along with that, is the precursor or the foundation for having a really fulfilling sexual partnership, for having a beautiful, abundant, ecstatic birth experience, for having a full, pleasurable motherhood experience,
Yeah.
and for every stage of a woman's life to have the basis of that be the relationship to your own femininity. And so we're going to talk today about specifically the pleasure principle, what that means, how we can, how we can get there, how we can foster that, how we can make this transition from the old paradigm of suffering and hardship into the new paradigm of how do we really embrace our full potential for pleasure in every aspect of our lives. So I'm going to be asking a few questions. We're just going to be dialoguing, and I'm really happy that you're all watching. And if you're watching live, feel free to ask questions or post comments in the Q&A section below, and we'll be glad to answer them as we go along. So one of the first things that we want to talk about is, well, I'd like to have Sheila first. I'd love to hear your a little bit about how you got into this field of guiding other women into having ecstatic birth experience. And if you want to share parts of your own personal journey, love to hear that. I think it's such a powerful story, and many women can benefit from that. So.
Thank you so much, and thank you for setting this up. This is my very first Google Hangout on air, so it's really exciting. I think there's no area of life that is deemed to be as unpleasurable as childbirth, right? I mean, when you think about childbirth, when you think about the images that the media shows, you see images of women screaming in agony, and I just want to acknowledge that the roots of that go really far back to the Bible and the story of Eve taking a bite of that apple. So for me, finding pleasure was sort of a funny accident in a way. I had, when I was pregnant with my first child, I loved being pregnant. I loved it. I was so amazed by my body. I was amazed by how it knew just what to do. I was gestating life. I felt so feminine, so beautiful, so powerful. And I wanted to feel that in my birth. And I did not know how to create that. I did not know how to prepare for that. I did what I could with the knowledge I had at the time, but I still ended up having an experience that was fairly traumatic. And in trying to heal from that experience, I had more trauma. I suffered a series of losses, And I was convinced that my body was broken, that something was wrong with me, and I was looking for an answer. I needed someone to help me figure out what was wrong with me. And I remember sitting down one day when I was really, really low and making a list of all these people I had to go see to help me, anything from like doctors to holistic healers and everything in between. And I made my circles, and everyone's like, no, Sheila, you're fine. You've just had bad luck. I came to the very, very last thing on my list was something called Mama Gina's School of Womanly Arts. Mama Gina is a teacher of pleasure in New York City, and at the time she was doing classes out of her living room. I was like, all right, I've tried everything else. I might as well try this. So that was how I came about, into the world of pleasure, very much, as a last choice. I had tried everything else and nothing had worked. And so I went to this school in Regina Thomas Showers Brownstone, and I started learning that actually my body is not broken, that if it's, if I'm exhibiting symptoms of something, it's my body trying to talk to me, trying to share its wisdom, that something's not right, on another level. And I started to learn how to honor my body, how to listen to the messages of my body, and how to integrate pleasure into my life. And that was a very, very healing and transformational experience. And around that time, I got pregnant with my second child. And I thought to myself, all right, I can see that pleasure is really powerful. I wonder if I could use it to prepare for my births. And I did. I did that with my second birth, and I had a very, such a healing experience, almost like a reclamation of my first experience. It was beautiful. It was Zen-like. I labored in water, and I came out of that experience feeling so empowered, so turned on, so amazed by my body and its, just what it was capable of. And so when I got pregnant with my third, I thought to myself, all right, I know I can do it. I know I can give birth in this really embodied feminine way. I want to know if I can enjoy it. In every natural childbirth book that I had ever read, there was a line or two that said something like, some women experience heightened states of bliss, ecstasy, and even orgasm in birth. Just one little line in a 200-300-page book, and I wanted to know what that was about. So I had started taking all these pleasure practices I had learned and figuring out how I could integrate them into my birth. And I had such an amazing birth experience where I was dancing through my labor, and I was really, I was higher than I've ever been in my life. And it was interesting because even though I had been very consciously preparing for pleasure in my birth, the experience that I had was still way bigger than what I had imagined in my head. Mm-hmm. And I remember I still feel very emotional about it because I remember thinking afterwards, I don't understand. Why didn't I know that this is possible? And why doesn't every woman know? Why are we living in this paradigm where childbirth is expected to be, something that women suffer through? When it's possible, it's very possible, a woman can enjoy that experience, have an empowering experience, and even a pleasurable experience. So that's, in a nutshell, how I came about doing the work that I do. I just felt so strongly that women need to know. And I started putting together a lot of the resources that I had leaned on in my own preparation for other women to access.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, it's so deeply inspiring to me. I'm not a mother, but I'd really like to be, and I just definitely feel like this is the pathway that makes the most sense. And it is strange. It's been suppressed for so long. It's odd. It's really it's sad, and the state of hospitals nowadays, and a lot of my own friends who've gone through birth experiences that have been really difficult, and it's just unnecessary. So I'm so happy that you're getting this message out. I feel like the more that we can share this, the more women are going to empower themselves, and it's all about your process of coming to this is so also inspiring because you just researched,
Mm-hmm.
created, you made the time, and you just found out what was possible, and then you did it. And to me is like, wow, any woman can do that. It's not like you had to go to the Himalayas and go through a bunch of initiations. You just you just taught yourself, and that's what's so awesome about, I think, women's work in general, is that women, we just need to tune into our bodies more, and the answers are there. The knowledge is there. The wisdom is there. And then with some skilled guidance on top of that, wow, we can have anything we want.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing is, when I was doing this 7, 8 years ago, there wasn't that much information out there. I remember Googling and researching and feeling like, wow, I'm kind of on the edge of available information. But today, if you were to Google and research and look for orgasmic birth, ecstatic birth, pleasure in birth, sensuality and childbirth, you will get a ton of information coming up, a ton of video clips, a ton of birth stories, a ton of resources. And it's really beautiful to see, because I believe this is, women are coming out of the woodworks not because this is the first time that this is possible for women, but I think women are coming out of the woodworks because a lot of the shame is being cast away. And I know we've spoken about shame a little bit, but I've spoken to so many women who have had spontaneous orgasmic births, and when they share their story, they're shameful a little bit. They didn't know that that was possible. They thought, oh my God, that's so weird. I just had an orgasm while I was giving birth, and they're embarrassed to share their stories. But now that I think more and more information is coming out there and more resources are there to support that, more women are also coming forth to share their stories with a sense of pride as opposed to shame, or a sense of, you know what, I don't have to hide that I had a good birth experience just because other people have had a bad birth experience, which there was always sort of this tradition of women sharing war stories. Oh, you think your birth was bad? Listen to what I went through,
Yeah, I remember all the conversations I've had where women are like, it's like trying to poop a watermelon. I really don't feel inspired by that imagery at all. Well, why don't we talk more then about shame, because I think that's a huge, beautiful place to delve into, and it's probably the most uncomfortable emotion to feel as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And as a woman, we've all been conditioned to feel a lot of shame around our sexuality and our bodies, and I'd love for you to talk about the relationship of shame and pleasure. And for me, I think my own journey of healing through a lot of sexual abuse and in my family, and just a lot of negative programming around sexuality from a religious upbringing, I find I'm still confronted by pleasure. It's some areas like I can accept it, but to a point, and then it's like, oh no, and then there's a shame that comes up, and I know that this is I think a lifelong journey of just going deeper and deeper and deeper into the bliss, into the ecstatic potential that we have. And definitely the more it's cleared away, more the shame can be cleared away and transmuted into joy, the more is possible. So I really feel we're so powerful as women. So I'd love to hear your perspective on, if you want to talk also about your own experience with shame and how you transformed that, and then working with other women, what you've noticed about where they get confronted with pleasure.
I think for all women, it's a work in progress. I mean, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about my own experience, I think it just keeps coming up. Shame and fear are the two things that keep coming up in regards to pleasure and birth. And I think that's just because we have to realize that we don't live in a society that supports that paradigm, that that values pleasure. And pleasure is seen as, it's frivolous, or it's dirty, or it's, and so we almost can't help it. And I think, the more you've grown up in mainstream society, the more you'll have that reaction. I remember the first time I bought myself a bouquet of flowers, walking home and feeling like I was about to get hit by a truck. Mm-hmm. And as silly as that sounds, I realized in that moment that that's how big that shift was for me, to say, you know what, like, just because I want to buy myself flowers just for the pure pleasure of it, I'm going to do it, and then to walk home feeling like I'm going to get hit by a truck, because that's the world we live in. That's it, the world we live in really doesn't value us spending our time and energy towards pleasure at all. Mm-hmm. And we feel like we're doing something wrong, or we're going to get punished for it in some way. And so I think it's a struggle that most women deal with on some level, and I think the more you can bring it to the light and really see it when it's there and set intentions to release it, the more it'll kind of dissipate and evaporate. But I think it's really the first step is acknowledging that that's a part of almost every woman's or every person's existence, really, when it comes to this, because it's not, the paradigm of pleasure is not something that our world currently supports.
Mm-hmm.
But it's becoming more so, as you said.
Definitely. So I'm curious too about, we talked about this a little bit before, but before this call, but I'd
Yeah.
like to share with women who are watching and who will watch this later. What message would you give to women to support them when they do feel shame, or what advice can you give? You had talked about, guiding, having women journal and things like that. I think those kind of things
Yeah.
are so awesome. So what are maybe the top 1 to 3 things that you would advise women who really confronted around either like sexual pleasure or pleasure during birth, just pleasure period in any area of
Yeah.
life as a woman.
I think that, like I said before, the number one thing is bring it into the light and be conscious of it. A lot of our monsters, whether it's shame or fear, when you turn on the light, it's kind of like the little kid that sees the monster in the corner of his room. You turn on the light and it's just a pile of clothes. So I think the first thing when you're dealing with really intense emotions like that is to bring it into the light, get really conscious, journal about it, understand what it is that's bringing up these strong emotions in you. So I would say journaling is a really big first step. Education is another one, because when you educate yourself, for example, in the world of birth, which is where I am mostly, the idea of anything sexual is like over here, and the idea of anything related to children is over here, separate. I don't know if you can see my hands with the video, but so they're completely separate, and so education and really understanding the physiology of the body and realizing that, you're not creating the baby with one body and birthing the baby with another. It's all part of the same process. Your sexuality and, giving birth and, becoming a mother and having a child, it's all a part of your sexuality. It's all a part of your femininity. And so the more you can educate yourself around that and the more you can understand that this is normal, like physiological process, that you are birthing your baby with the same anatomical parts as you use when you're making the baby, and so it's all interrelated. And the more you educate yourself, you'll see that a lot of the same hormones are released, a lot of the same conditions that make for an optimal, pleasurable, sensual experience make for optimal, pleasurable birth. So education, I would say, is another really big tool, and support. Sometimes the issues that we have around shame or fear run really deep. They could run from past trauma or abuse or things like that. And the more you can seek out people that can really fully support you in your growth and in your healing, the stronger you'll be for it.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And you mentioned it, while you were talking, it made me think sometimes women judge themselves for not, like, let's say they don't have a pleasurable birth experience and they've been preparing for that. And let's say it just didn't happen, or
Yeah.
having a C-section and they wanted to have a natural birth. How do you guide women, or what would you advise women who go through those kind of experiences and to unhook from the shame of that or the guilt?
Yeah. I think that's a really big issue, because I think I see a lot of women get turned on to this idea of an ecstatic birth or an orgasmic birth, and they say, I want that. And they hold it as this ideal in their mind, and then they judge their own births by that and can feel like a failure, or they fell short, or they didn't succeed in their desire. And I think it's a shame, because it's almost like, it's almost like looking at an ideal life. Like if you think about what you want for your life, what are your ideals, right? We all understand that as you move through life, you might get some of them, you might not, but your ideals are there to inspire you to be better, to do better, to work towards, and that ideal elevates you whether or not it comes into a reality. So I think the big message that I want women to know is that, yes, there is this ideal. You can create an ideal in your head of what a pleasurable birth looks like or an orgasmic birth looks like, but that ideal is meant to inspire you and not to judge yourself by.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of women will have certain parts of their birth experience might fall short of their ideal, and then they focus on that one piece. Oh, it was great except for this, or oh, it was bad except for that, or it was great except for that. And rather than focus on the one thing that did not meet your ideal, why don't you focus on everything you did right? Let's celebrate ourselves. And this is another piece of training that women need. Women really need to be able to celebrate all the things that they do well in life. And most of us are going through our lives not thinking about everything that's going right, but thinking about the problems we need to solve, or, you know, oh, I messed up in this. And so it's kind of a retraining. And a lot of birth teachers talk about the way you live your life is related to the way you birth. And I definitely see that being true. So one thing I encourage women I work with to do is start getting really clear on your own patterns. Watch yourself as you go through your day and see, you know, how do you react if things don't go to plan? Is it something that like really takes you down, or is it something like, okay, well, you know, let's make the most of it in this way. Can you make the lemonade? And that's a practice. That's a practice in the way you live. And a lot of that stuff will come up in how you birth as well.
Yeah, I definitely think about that in terms of just the body, how tight. There's these chronic tension holding patterns in our bodies just from living in a city, living in a modern world, commuting, sitting in chairs, just the way we use our bodies, and the way that tension gets accumulated from the way, you know, our toxic environment. And my thought is like, well, how do we, I mean, I've done a lot of work in somatics and dance and really connecting sensually, attuning sensually to my body, slowing down, breathing, but still, there's a lot of chronic tension holding patterns in my own body.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine for just the average woman who is not in tune or hasn't done any somatic work or yoga or tai chi or anything to connect her body. Maybe she only lifts weights in the gym, or she runs, and then she gets pregnant and then wants to have this opening experience, but, you know, maybe another woman who just gets stuck at, you know, 5 centimeters dilation or whatever. Like, I just hear so many stories of women.
Yeah.
They're physically active, they're healthy, they're young, they're productive, they're successful, but when it comes to birthing, their body gets stuck, and then, you know, they may have a difficult experience, or they have to get a C-section, so or late-induced labor. So I'd love to hear also your perspective on that. Like, how do you then become softer and actually become more fluid and open? What's your experience with that in terms of really opening your body so that you could have a pleasurable birth experience?
I think it is a practice, like you said, and it's easy to say, well, you know, the sooner you start, the better it'll be. That's definitely true, but a lot of women don't really get that consciousness until they become pregnant and start to think about what kind of birth they want to have. So it becomes really tricky, because for somebody who's been practicing being comfortable in her body, being open to her sensuality, to be open to flow, it definitely helps in your birth preparation. However, for somebody who is just coming to that, I would say that birth is one of the most transformational growth experiences that you can have in your life. And the reason for that is you have that short timeline. So whether you're realizing, you know, when you just get pregnant or when you're 6 months pregnant that you want to have, you know, an ecstatic birth or a pleasurable birth or a natural birth, all of a sudden you have a timeline. And that puts a bit of a fire under women to get moving and to get things done. And I would say that the number one thing that prevents a woman from fully flowing through her birth experience is actually fear. And what happens when you're fearful, like if you can actually feel it in your body. When you're fearful, you clamp down, you tense up, you resist, and that disrupts flow, that disrupts energy flow, that disrupts circulation, and that can really trip a woman up during birth. So if you're towards the later stages of your pregnancy, I would definitely recommend that you do take up some of these practices that you mentioned. But in addition to that, I would highly recommend having a doula at your birth, because A doula is a woman who can really allow you to lay down your fears and support you through them.
Mm-hmm.
And studies have actually shown that having a doula at your birth can reduce your risk of intervention by almost 50%. So that's huge. That's huge. Having like a loving female presence at your birth really supports you through your fears. So that's one thing I would recommend. And then also the practice we talked about earlier where you journal, really look at your fears, really understand what they are, and then take them one at a time and see how can I support myself through them. The more you can disarm your fears ahead of your birth, the more you'll be able to flow through the sensations in birth.
That's awesome. Yay! We have a few minutes left, so I wanted to ask you to share what it is that you're offering women, how they can find you, and yeah, just the different services and products that you have available to them. Because I think what you're doing is amazing, and I really want.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the main thing that I offer on my website is ecstatic-birth.com. The main thing that I offer there is a digital product called the Ecstatic Birth Training Sessions. And what that is it's 20 audio sessions. You also receive transcripts and exercises that you can do. But the hulk of it is 20 audio sessions with leading teachers in the worlds of birth, female health, female sensuality, and they're each speaking to a different aspect of ecstatic birth prep. So you have anything from, what should I be eating, and all the way to how do I feel more comfortable in my body, how do I use pleasure to have a good birth experience, how do I choose a birth practitioner, all the different aspects, how do I deal with my fears, all these different aspects of ecstatic birth prep. You can listen to the audios and work through the exercises, and you'll learn actually directly from somebody who's an expert in that particular area. So that's the main thing that I offer. Then in addition to that, I also do private consultations. So for women who have listened to the ecstatic birth training sessions, they're like, that's great, I get the vision, I understand the ideas, but I'm having a hard time integrating them into my own birth prep. Like, how do I do that? So I do that piece of hand-holding as well, where women can come to me and I can advise them in their birth prep in that way.
Yay! So I'll make sure to we'll put your website below on the YouTube, the final YouTube version of this interview or dialogue.
Thank you.
And I also want to share that for women who really want to connect more with their voice and their sexuality. So I think also in terms of breaking through shame, a huge healing tool is just expression, just being able to say, this is what I want, this is what I desire, and learning how to ask for what we want. I think this is so key and extremely powerful to break through a lot of those patterns of like shutting down, becoming passive, giving away our power. In whatever context, whether that's as a wife or partner, with a lover, as a woman who's an expectant mother, with interfacing with the medical community, and in any phase of life, I think it's just extremely important that we own our desires and learn to express them. So coming up at on the 24th of this month, on May 24th, it's just Saturday, I'm going to be co-teaching a workshop for women around sexuality and voice, and learning to own our desires and our full self-expression, and connecting the voice center with our sex center, like really being like, how do we honor this portal of life through our voice. And connecting those two is extremely powerful in my own experience. So I'll put that information down as well. And I'm really excited that all this knowledge and these tools are becoming more and more available, and we get to support each other, creating this new paradigm.
Me too. And I just want to say also the workshop that you're offering around your voice is also incredible birth prep, because sounding and opening and being able to use your voice in birth helps you open. Down below, there's a saying, as above, down so below. So when you're open in your voice and when you're able to sound and breathe and really open up above, it helps you open up for your baby to come through as well. So I love the work that you do, and I think that the work that you do is truly a form of ecstatic birth prep as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and I was also reflecting, the birth process is just natural to women, whether you're birthing a biological baby or you're birthing a creative project or you're birthing the next version of yourself. It's just our process is birth, birth, birth.
Yeah.
And that inherent is that in that um, is this principle of fluidity, like being the river, really being the river that flows and tuning in with that, like surrendering to that power of this flow. And every woman I've talked to who has had a really powerful birth experience, it's like that sensation of becoming one with this flow,
Mm-hmm.
like completely surrendering to the moving through of that
Yeah.
power. And for performers, for artists, for myself as a dancer, the times I've had the most powerful experiences have been just that, like this complete surrender to this power that's far more potent than my own, limited mind or my own conception of myself, my limited persona, and just completely letting go, and allowing that to dissolve into this yeah, surrender, release. So I think that the fear of surrender is really the fear of death. And I mean, I also am curious to hear about how do you deal with women's fear? Because there is a primal fear. I know we're just about finished with our conversation, but this is just coming up in my mind.
Yeah.
This is a primal, real fear of death. So many women throughout history have died in childbirth, and the fear of death in any kind of situation where you have to deeply surrender and let go.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that that's the most powerful point. Like being that vulnerable and not trusting is precisely where we have the most expansion and power. And yet it's so frightening. So any last thoughts on that topic before we wrap
I
up?
think that that's a part of giving birth. So you mentioned giving birth to yourself. I think a big part of giving birth for every woman is there's a part of her that dies when she gives birth on a metaphorical level. There's the part of her that, especially for a first time mom, the part of her that is completely unattached and carefree and, autonomous. That part is gone. The maiden dies, right? And the mother is born. So it's a rite of passage. Giving birth is a rite of passage, and rite of passages can be difficult. They can be scary, but they also hold the capacity for taking you higher than you've ever been before. So I think when you think about birth in that way, yeah, it does make sense. There is on a really primal level this fear of death. But again, I think that can also be addressed with education and really understanding, well, why was there historically this experience where women were dying? Well, in some cases it wasn't adequate medical care. In some cases it wasn't adequate nutrition. A lot of those forces we're very lucky we don't have to deal with anymore. But I think regardless of that, every woman when she's going into her birth experience knows that there's a part of her that she's saying goodbye to forever. But there's a new part that's also being born.
Mm,
And the key, I think, is really being more excited about what's coming up than being fearful of what you're letting go of.
mm. That's so beautiful. Yay, thank you. Wow.
Thank you. This was fun.
Um, yeah, I really appreciate you and what you're bringing to the table. It's kind of appropriate. I'm sitting on the kitchen table, so we talk about women stuff than the kitchen table. But really, I so honor you and thank you for what you're doing in the world, and support you, and we'll just continue to support each other. So
You are amazing. I'm so glad we connected, and I'm so glad we were able to do this today.
yeah, you too. So thank you all for watching, and please share this with your female friends and your male friends too. And let's keep bringing in this paradigm of pleasure. Let's keep practicing it and supporting each other. And have a beautiful day.
Bye.